Okay, so this is my response to the article Casual Racism and Stuttering Failures. And to be honest, it's difficult to know even where to begin with this article. I found it incredibly powerful, and I also related to some of the situations that the author found herself in, except in my position, I was a student rather than an instructor. So I'm going to start with question one, and hopefully this will make sense and I'll be able to get through all of it, because there are so many thoughts that are sort of going around in my head because of this article. So question one asks us to reread page 47, or 44, sorry, and answer one of the questions in light of an experience that we've had. There are a lot of questions that I think require a lot of critical thought, and I think they're amazing questions to be asking, but the one that really kind of stuck out for me was this one. Do you respond to discussions politically or personally? What kind of incidents prompt which responses? And I think, for me, I find a lot of truth in this idea that the personal is political. And I'm reminded of some of the articles that we've had to read in the past in this program, and one of them was talking about the politics of teaching and how, and we were asking ourselves the questions of whether or not teaching can ever really be anything but political. And I tend to think that it always is, no matter what it is that you're doing. And I think that there's a political thought behind what you choose to either put into your lessons or the things that you choose not to talk about. And I think silence, in particular, can be a political statement. So yeah, that was one of the things that I was thinking about quite a bit. And with that in mind, one of the other things that I was relating more to an experience was down at the bottom. It says here, should an instructor never silence a student? Should other students silence a student? And the experience that I was thinking of happened in my undergrad. It was in a modern critical theory course, and we had been talking about this idea of women authors, and how women authors are really quite underrepresented in not only, the Norton Anthology of English Literature, but also just in general, when it comes to even applications for any sort of writing contest or anything. I mean, female authors are severely underrepresented in a lot of ways. And there was a student in the class who was a comic book enthusiast, and he had brought up comic books a lot and what was happening in the comic industry. And he brought up women authors who had decided to publish under a pseudonym, a male pseudonym, to get their work out there, and then they changed their name after they were established. And he had said, I don't understand what the big deal is. I don't understand why women don't just write under a pseudonym if they want their work out there. And of course, this is a class full of people that, are trying to be so aware of sort of their frames of reference, and so aware of, the patriarchal system that kind of allows for comments like that to go sort of unnoticed. And the entire class was just kind of up in arms about it, and how would you even be able to say that? And I remember sitting there thinking, I don't think that he's saying that in order to be offensive. And I sat there and I thought, yeah, I think this is mainly just coming from a place of ignorance. I don't think that he understands why this is an offensive comment to women. And so I turned to him and I was like, well, you see, the point is that women shouldn't have to. And then try to kind of continue on with that line of thought. And funnily enough, it was a comment. It reminds me a lot of the situation that the author was talking about when things got moved to the message boards. And in this case, that also happened with this particular student who went on and tried to defend himself afterwards. But his thought hadn't really changed, and it became quite clear that it hadn't. And he was getting brutally attacked by some of these students, and I remember being on those message boards trying to say, I don't think that this is meant to be harmful. And in some ways, I feel like I should have handled that differently, and there were some moments where I thought that I was defending him when maybe I shouldn't have been. But I can't really get into a whole bunch of details about, that conversation because I don't really remember a lot of it, to be honest. But I remember feeling really uncomfortable with how that got dealt with those particular students, and how, not only that particular student's comment, but how his classmates had responded to him as well. And so this idea of whether or not students should ever be able to silence other students, I think for me, as an instructor, any situation that has arisen, usually I take a step back from it, and my first thing to do is assess whether or not it's coming from a place of ignorance or whether or not it's coming from a place of hate. And if it's said with the intention to harm, then I think that it's appropriate to silence that. But I think if it's coming from a place of ignorance, I think we almost have an obligation to listen to it and to think about it critically and then respond. And as an instructor, I've taken a step back, and there have been moments where I've said, I've opened it up to a class discussion, and I've said, does anyone want to respond to this comment? And generally, I've worked with students and worked with other individuals who, I've been quite fortunate, right? They've all been critical thinkers, or a lot of them have, and anytime that something that is offensive has been said, it's been diffused without much harm, I suppose. But I also, this article made me realize that I do have to think, and I do have to be prepared for a situation where maybe that technique isn't appropriate, or maybe that technique is going to go south, and I need to be comfortable diffusing that. And I don't know if I am. And I think that kind of ties into question 2. What are your fears of failure to respond appropriately to an event in class? What have you witnessed or been a part of in the past in this regard? It's sort of, it ties in a little bit, and I can remember a specific situation as well. I like to give people the benefit of the doubt, and I remember in one particular situation, I didn't want to seem as though I was being disrespectful to a classmate. And this was earlier in this program. Oh, I feel like this is all over the place. I apologize, guys. But earlier in this program, for one of our classes, we were asked to teach a lesson that was outside of our subject area, and my group decided that we were going to do social studies, and we were going to study the Japanese internment in BC. And we were trying to kind of get across this idea that history is written from a specific perspective, and usually it's a victor's perspective. And one of our other classmates, it was a group project, one of our classmates ended up making the comment in her closing statements that in the room, we were all Caucasian, and how we could only think of things from a particular perspective because of that. And we were not all Caucasian in that classroom. It was a classroom of about 16 of us, and we were definitely not all Caucasian. And I remember catching the eye of another person that I was presenting with, and the article talks about shame drawing you into your body and making you very aware of your body. That was the situation that I had. I was feeling incredibly awkward. I didn't know whether or not I should, interrupt her and try and correct her mistake, or whether or not I should just let it go. And I let it go. And I regret doing that now, because I do feel as though, I made the assumption that the classroom would have caught it and would have thought, okay, no, that's just a slip, and we can let it go. And I mean, we were a classroom of critical thinkers, so that's pretty much what ended up happening. But I do think that it's important to call things like that out. And even if it is just sort of an ignorant comment, to be able to have a conversation about it. And understand why, you misspoke in this situation for this reason, right? And have that conversation. Yeah, what ideas or suggestions do you have to support both yourself and your peers in preparing for the unpredictable? This idea of mindfulness, I mean, it's been discussed so often, but just being able to be mindful and to understand and to be able to take a step back and listen when it's appropriate, and also be willing to cut something off when it is coming from a place of hate, I think is really important. But I'm going to cut this off now because it's getting too long. Sorry, guys.